Have you ever wondered what it takes to turn absolute certainty into complete terror? Perhaps you know about the great battles of Vietnam, the famous offensives, but we rarely hear about the siege that defied every military calculation and transformed mockery into respect, written in blood and fire. Today I'm going to share with you the incredible story of Khe Sanh, a remote combat base where 6,000 Marines faced what intelligence estimated to be between 20,000 and 40,000 North Vietnamese Army regulars and Viet Cong fighters who had promised to deliver the next Dien Bien Phu. A story of endurance, firepower, and psychological warfare that still generates debate among military historians. Prepare to discover how a besieged garrison turned what was supposed to be their grave into the nightmare of those who came to bury them. If you're here, we share something special. A deep fascination with the events that shaped modern military history. Finding content that truly explores the technical, strategic, and human aspects of Vietnam's most controversial battles isn't easy. This channel exists for that reason. Each video represents hours of research into declassified documents, veteran testimonies, and tactical analyses. We create history with respect and precision. Subscribe now and join our community of enthusiasts. Together, we'll honor those who lived these moments, keeping their stories alive and understood. Now, back to January 1967.
January 21st, 1968, 0530 hours, Khe Sanh Combat Base, Quang Tri Province, Republic of Vietnam. Captain Mirza Baig felt the earth convulse beneath his boots before his mind could process what was happening. The North Vietnamese Army had begun what would become the most concentrated artillery bombardment American forces had faced since the Korean War. The main ammunition dump, containing nearly 1,500 tons of ordnance, erupted in a fireball that turned night into day across the Quang Tri Plateau. Corporal William Jones, a 20-year-old rifleman from Georgia serving with the 26th Marine Regiment, watched from his fighting position as secondary explosions sent CS gas canisters spiraling into the sky like demented fireworks, raining chemical irritant across friendly positions. The siege that General Vo Nguyen Giap had personally planned, the operation that Hanoi Radio had already proclaimed would become America's Dien Bien Phu, had officially begun. But what neither Giap nor his field commanders fully understood was that this was not 1954, and the Americans were not the French. The Khe Sanh Combat Base sat in the northwestern corner of South Vietnam, a desolate plateau of red clay and elephant grass approximately 14 miles south of the demilitarized zone and 6 miles from the Laotian border. To understand why this particular piece of real estate became the focus of one of the most intense confrontations of the Vietnam War requires understanding the strategic obsessions that drove both American and North Vietnamese planning in late 1967. General William Westmoreland, commander of Military Assistance Command Vietnam, saw Khe Sanh as the western anchor of a defensive system designed to stop North Vietnamese infiltration through the DMZ. The base sat astride Route 9, one of the few east-west roads capable of supporting mechanized movement, and its position offered surveillance over the Ho Chi Minh Trail's eastern approaches. But Westmoreland's vision extended beyond mere defense. He believed that by establishing a strong position at Khe Sanh, he could lure North Vietnamese forces into a set-piece battle where American firepower superiority could be brought to bear decisively. He envisioned creating another Ia Drang Valley, where in 1965 American artillery and air power had inflicted catastrophic casualties on NVA regulars who had accepted conventional battle. From Hanoi's perspective, Khe Sanh represented something entirely different but equally compelling. General Giap, the architect of Dien Bien Phu, who had orchestrated the defeat that drove France from Indochina 14 years earlier, saw in Khe Sanh's isolated position and surrounding hills an opportunity to repeat history. The parallels were seductive. Like Dien Bien Phu, Khe Sanh sat in a valley surrounded by high ground. Like the French base, it depended entirely on air supply for sustainment. Like the doomed French garrison, the Americans would be fighting far from their main bases at the end of a tenuous supply line in terrain that favored the attacker. Giap committed 4 full divisions to the operation: the 304th, 325C, 320th, and elements of the 324B, representing some of the most experienced units in the People's Army of Vietnam. These were not the local force Viet Cong guerrillas who had borne the brunt of American operations in the Mekong Delta and Central Highlands. These were regular army formations equipped with heavy weapons, trained in conventional warfare, veterans of campaigns stretching back to the war against France. Intelligence estimates placed their strength at minimum 20,000 troops, possibly as high as 40,000, when support elements and local forces were included. They brought with them an arsenal that surprised American intelligence: Soviet 130mm field guns with a range of 27,000 meters, capable of striking Khe Sanh from positions in Laos beyond the reach of American counter-battery fire, 122mm rockets, 82mm and 120mm mortars, anti-aircraft guns, including the deadly ZPU-23mm system, and even PT-76 light tanks, the first time the NVA had deployed armor in the northern provinces. The Marines who would defend Khe Sanh were primarily from the 26th Marine Regiment, reinforced by elements of the 9th Marine Regiment, along with the 1st Battalion 13th Marines providing artillery support, and the 37th ARVN Ranger Battalion holding positions south of the main base. Approximately 6,000 men occupied the main combat base and its hilltop outposts. Lieutenant Colonel David Lowndes commanded the 26th Marines and overall defense. He was a veteran of World War II and Korea, a professional officer who understood that his mission was not to conduct aggressive patrolling or seek decisive engagement, but to hold ground and serve as the anvil against which American air power would hammer the NVA divisions. The Marines had arrived at Khe Sanh in larger numbers beginning in late 1967 as intelligence detected the massive NVA buildup. They improved the existing airstrip to handle C-130 transports, constructed bunkers and fighting positions, registered artillery defensive fires, and prepared for what they knew was coming. The base occupied approximately 1,000 meters by 500 meters of relatively flat ground, dominated by hills with designations that would become famous: Hill 881 South, Hill 881 North, Hill 861, Hill 558, and Hill 950. The Marines held some of these hills, particularly 881 South and 861, which provided observation and denied the enemy direct fire positions into the main base. Other hills remained in enemy hands, their slopes honeycombed with bunkers and supply caches. The confident mockery came from Hanoi radio broadcasts and captured documents. Propaganda leaflets dropped on Marine positions showed caricatures of Americans trapped like the French at Dien Bien Phu, promised that Khe Sanh would become a graveyard, predicted that the American public would force withdrawal once body bags started flowing home in sufficient numbers. NVA officers told their troops that this campaign would break American will, that the fall of Khe Sanh would demonstrate that despite all their technology and firepower, the Americans were as vulnerable as any previous colonial power. Some of this propaganda found its way into American media. Journalists drew the Dien Bien Phu parallel. Walter Cronkite mentioned it in CBS broadcasts. President Lyndon Johnson became obsessed with Khe Sanh, had a terrain model constructed in the White House Situation Room, demanded daily briefings, and privately expressed fear that Westmoreland might be walking into a trap. The psychological dimension of the siege began before the first artillery round landed. Both sides understood they were fighting for more than tactical advantage. This was a test of will, of system versus system, of contrasting theories about how modern war should be fought. The preparatory bombardment that began on January 21st exceeded anything the Marines had experienced. In the first day alone, approximately 1,300 rounds of artillery, rocket and mortar fire impacted the base. The destruction of the ammunition dump in the opening minutes eliminated approximately 90% of the stockpiled munitions and all the tear gas rounds, meaning the Marines would fight the entire siege with only what could be flown in daily. The CH-46 helicopter that had been sitting on the airstrip, loaded with supplies, was destroyed. Fuel bladders ignited, creating smoke that obscured the base for hours. 6 Marines died in that first bombardment. 18 were wounded. The main aid station took a direct hit. Captain Edward Breeding's C Company positions were struck repeatedly. Throughout that first day, as shells continued to fall in irregular patterns, the Marines understood with absolute clarity that they were in for something unprecedented. This was not harassment fire. This was preparatory bombardment designed to soften defenses before infantry assault. The NVA had shown their hand. They had revealed the presence of heavy artillery. They had demonstrated their willingness to expend ammunition at rates that suggested massive stockpiles. They had announced their intentions as clearly as if they had sent a formal declaration. What happened next was supposed to be the inevitable sequence: bombardment, infantry assault, base overrun, American defeat broadcast around the world. The NVA had done their reconnaissance. They had infiltrated spotters who could call in accurate fire. They had dug approach trenches on the hills they controlled, some advancing to within a few hundred meters of Marine positions. They had pre-positioned supplies in caves and bunkers throughout the surrounding terrain. They had everything necessary for a successful siege: numerical superiority, positional advantage, heavy firepower, experienced troops, and absolute commitment from the highest levels of Hanoi's leadership. What they did not fully account for was the American capacity to deliver firepower in volumes that defied comprehension. The United States military in 1968 possessed the most sophisticated air power and artillery coordination system ever developed. Operation Niagara, the code name for the air support campaign, would demonstrate exactly what that meant. General Westmoreland had begun planning for Khe Sanh's defense months earlier. He understood that if the NVA committed to siege, the response would require every available asset. Under Niagara, intelligence gathering and targeting became a unified system. Sensors, many of them acoustic and seismic devices, air-dropped along the Ho Chi Minh Trail and around Khe Sanh, detected troop movements and were monitored at a secret facility in Thailand. Forward, air controllers in light aircraft orbited constantly, marking targets with smoke rockets. Strategic bombers, tactical fighters, helicopter gunships, and close air support aircraft were all integrated into a targeting queue managed from the Tactical Air Control Center at Dong Ha and the Airborne Battlefield Command and Control Center aircraft that orbited above the combat zone. Artillery from Khe Sanh itself, from fire bases at Kalu and Camp Carroll, and from marine batteries throughout the region were coordinated to deliver what planners called a ring of fire around the base perimeter. The numbers that resulted from this system are almost incomprehensible. During the 77-day siege, American aircraft flew 24,000 tactical sorties and 2,700 B-52 bomber sorties, the latter dropping 75,000 tons of ordnance. Artillery fired over 200,000 rounds. In total, approximately 100,000 tons of bombs and shells were delivered into the area surrounding Khe Sanh, equivalent to 5 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs in conventional explosive power, the greatest single concentration of firepower in the history of warfare up to that time. The Marines inside the base experienced the siege as a grinding test of endurance under fire. Every day brought incoming artillery and rocket attacks, sometimes hundreds of rounds, sometimes just harassing fire designed to keep heads down and nerves frayed. Moving between positions required sprinting across open ground, trusting that the next incoming round would land somewhere else. Resupply became a desperate operation. C-130 transports initially landed, but as the airstrip took more damage and anti-aircraft fire intensified, the Air Force switched to LAPIS, low-altitude parachute extraction system, where aircraft flew low over the runway and used parachutes to literally drag pallets of supplies out the back ramp without landing. Eventually, even that became too dangerous, and resupply shifted to helicopter and parachute drop. Every piece of food, every gallon of water, every artillery shell, every medical supply had to be flown in under fire. Casualties had to be evacuated the same way. Helicopters would approach in diving spirals to throw off anti-aircraft gunners, touch down for seconds, and claw back into the sky. Many never made it. The Air Force and Marine Corps lost 33 fixed-wing aircraft and numerous helicopters during the siege. Life in the bunkers became its own form of combat. Lance Corporal Robert Johnson from Illinois, serving with E Company 2nd Battalion 26th Marines on Hill 881 South, later described conditions in interviews that military historians recorded. The bunkers, constructed with wood beams, sandbags, and corrugated metal, offered protection from everything except direct hits from heavy-caliber artillery. The red clay soil of the plateau turned to thick mud during the monsoon rains that persisted through much of the siege. Men lived in that mud, slept in it, ate sea rations while sitting in it. The smell was overwhelming: unwashed bodies, human waste, rotting sandbags, cordite, and death. Rats infested every position. Sleep came in snatches between bombardments. The psychological pressure was constant, knowing that thousands of enemy soldiers were out there in the hills, knowing that any moment might bring the final assault, knowing that if the base was overrun, there would be no rescue. Some men broke under the strain. Combat fatigue cases increased, but most held. They held because they were Marines, because their training had prepared them for exactly this kind of fight, because the bonds between men in combat units are stronger than fear, and because they were angry. The enemy had promised to overrun them, had mocked them, had compared them to defeated French colonialists, and that was unacceptable. Have you ever caught yourself wondering what it would be like to be there, inside that bunker, with the earth shaking from artillery impacts and the knowledge that enemy soldiers were digging trenches closer every night? Or perhaps you have a family member who served in Vietnam and could never fully explain what it was like to live under siege for 77 days. I know many of you carry stories, questions, and personal connections to Vietnam that you rarely have the opportunity to share. This is your safe space. Leave in the comments, "The story that connects me to Vietnam is," and share your unique perspective. Your experience might be exactly what someone needs to hear to understand the true human dimension of these events. I'm pausing here for a moment so you can reflect, because I believe history only gains true meaning when we make it personal. The hilltop outposts faced conditions even worse than the main base. Hill 881 South and Hill 861 were essentially isolated fortresses supplied entirely by helicopter, subjected to even more concentrated fire because of their exposed positions. The Marines on these hills could see the NVA moving in the valleys below, could watch the muzzle flashes from enemy guns, could hear Vietnamese voices in the night as sappers probed their wire. They called in artillery fire danger close, meaning shells were landing within 200 meters of their own positions, because that was the only way to stop enemy infantry attempting to close. They fought off probing attacks, small unit actions designed to test defenses and identify weak points. On January 20th, before the main siege began, a company from the 1st Battalion 9th Marines had been overrun at a patrol base called Hill 64, and the survivors had to fight their way back to the main base. On February 5th, the NVA launched a major assault against Hill 861A and portions of the main base perimeter. The attacks were beaten back with heavy casualties on both sides, but they demonstrated that the NVA was willing to accept losses in direct infantry assault, that GIAP's plan included more than just artillery bombardment and starvation siege. The Marine artillery batteries, particularly Battery F, 2nd Battalion 12th Marines, worked their guns continuously. Fire missions came down so frequently that the gun crews operated in rotation, some men loading and firing while others rested, trying to maintain a sustainable pace. The 100mm and 155mm howitzers were registered on every approach, every known enemy position, every suspected assembly area. When sensors detected movement, when forward air controllers spotted targets, when listening posts reported sounds of digging, artillery responded. Counter-battery fire became a deadly duel. The Marines would identify the source of incoming fire, plot the location, and immediately return fire. The NVA would displace their guns into caves or behind terrain features, then move them back to firing positions later. Both sides lost weapons to counter-fire. Both sides lost men. The artillerymen at Khe Sanh fired more rounds per gun than any American artillery unit had fired since World War II. Barrels wore out and had to be replaced. Recoil mechanisms failed from constant use. Men worked until they collapsed, then worked more. The air campaign transformed the tactical situation in ways the NVA had not anticipated. B-52 strikes, conducted by ARC light missions from bases in Thailand and Guam, were particularly devastating. Each B-52 carried up to 60,000 pounds of bombs. They flew at altitudes above 30,000 feet, invisible and inaudible from the ground. The first indication of their presence was the Earth erupting in a rolling pattern of explosions that extended for thousands of meters. A single three-plane cell could devastate an area 1/2 mile wide by 1.5 miles long, killing everything within that box. Intelligence analysts estimated that B-52 strikes accounted for 50 to 75% of NVA casualties during the siege. Prisoners captured after strikes described the psychological effect: the constant fear of death arriving without warning, the impossibility of effective defense, the knowledge that massive formations could be annihilated in seconds. Tactical aircraft added precision strikes against specific targets. Navy and Marine F-4 Phantoms, Air Force F-100 Super Sabres and F-105 Thunderchiefs, Marine A-4 Skyhawks, all flew missions into what became the most heavily defended airspace in Southeast Asia. The NVA had deployed multiple anti-aircraft regiments, creating an integrated defense system with overlapping fields of fire. They shot down aircraft regularly, but the missions continued because stopping them meant stopping the defense of Khe Sanh. Technical aspects of the weaponry employed by both sides merit detailed examination. The NVA 130mm M46 field gun was a Soviet-designed weapon with a maximum range of 27,400 meters, firing a 33.4 kilogram projectile. The version provided to North Vietnam included Chinese-manufactured ammunition and fire control equipment. These guns were positioned in Laotian territory, beyond the range of marine counter-battery fire, and technically off-limits to American ground operations due to political restrictions on cross-border attacks. From these positions, they could strike anywhere within Khe Sanh with impunity, adjusting fire based on spotters' reports, firing and then withdrawing into protected positions. The 122mm rocket was equally problematic, a man-portable system that could be set up quickly, fired, and abandoned before counterfire arrived. Its 18.8 kilogram warhead delivered significant fragmentation and blast effect. The Marines learned to recognize the distinctive shriek of incoming rockets and could sometimes take cover in time, but not always. The psychological effect of weapons that could strike anywhere at any time, day or night, without warning, was precisely what the NVA intended. American artillery at Khe Sanh centered on the M101A1 105mm howitzer and the M104A1 155mm howitzer. The 105mm could fire up to 8 rounds per minute with a trained crew, delivering a 15-kilogram high-explosive shell to ranges exceeding 11,000 meters. The 150mm fired a heavier 43-kilogram projectile to ranges of 14,600 meters, though at a slower rate of fire. Both weapons were World War II designs, proven and reliable, but their effectiveness at Khe Sanh came from coordination and volume rather than technical superiority. Fire direction centers calculated trajectories, coordinated with aircraft to prevent friendly fire incidents, and maintained continuous communications with all firing units. The introduction of radar-controlled variable time-fuse artillery shells, which detonated above ground rather than on impact, increased effectiveness against troops in the open. Cluster munitions containing hundreds of small bomblets were employed against area targets. White phosphorus rounds provided smoke for marking targets and screening movements, while also having an incendiary effect that made them feared by enemy troops. Air-delivered ordnance reached levels of sophistication that the French at Dien Bien Phu could not have imagined. The B-52 primarily dropped M117 750-pound general-purpose bombs, but also employed M118 3,000-pound demolition bombs against hardened targets like bunkers and cave complexes. These weapons created craters large enough to swallow vehicles, collapsed tunnel systems, and produced overpressure effects that killed through internal injuries even when fragmentation did not reach the target. Tactical aircraft employed the full spectrum of conventional weapons: 500-pound and 1,000-pound bombs, napalm canisters that spread jellied gasoline across target areas, creating firestorms, cluster bomb units, rockets, and cannon fire from 20mm Vulcan rotary cannons that fired up to 6,000 rounds per minute. Forward air controllers marked targets with white phosphorus rockets, then directed strike aircraft onto the smoke, coordinating attacks in rapid succession to maintain continuous pressure. The AC-47 Spooky gunship, armed with 7.622-meter miniguns, provided nighttime support, circling at altitude and pouring fire down on targets identified by flares or ground tracers. Later in the siege, newer AC-130 gunships joined with even heavier armament, including 20mm and 40mm cannon. The human cost manifested differently on both sides. For the Marines, casualties were meticulously recorded. 205 Americans died during the siege, with another 1,600 wounded. Every name was documented, every loss reported home, every body evacuated when possible. Medical care was sophisticated despite the difficult conditions. Corpsmen provided immediate treatment at the point of injury. Casualties were moved to battalion aid stations where doctors performed emergency surgery. Serious cases were evacuated by helicopter to surgical hospitals at Dong Ha or Phu Bai, weather permitting. The survival rate for Americans who reached medical treatment was over 97%, a testament to the quality of military medicine. But those who died hard. They died from artillery fragments that shredded flesh faster than corpsmen could staunch bleeding, from rockets that detonated inside bunkers, turning men into shadows burned onto walls, from sniper rounds during the seconds of exposure required to move between positions, from aircraft crashes while evacuating wounded, from 1,000 random chances in a battle where death was omnipresent. For the NVA, casualty figures remain disputed. American estimates based on body counts, aerial reconnaissance, sensor data, and prisoner interrogation suggested between 10,000 and 15,000 NVA killed during the siege and associated operations. The North Vietnamese government has never released comprehensive casualty figures from Khe Sanh, maintaining the same secrecy they imposed on most operational details. What is known from post-war accounts and captured documents is that entire battalions ceased to exist as fighting formations, that some regiments lost 70 to 80% of their strength, that the hospitals in Laos overflowed with wounded, that burial details worked continuously. The difference in casualty ratios, perhaps 50 to 1 or higher, reflected the fundamental asymmetry of the battle. The Americans had artillery and air power in effectively unlimited quantities. The NVA had manpower and determination. When those two elements collided at Khe Sanh, the mathematics were brutal. An NVA soldier advancing across open ground toward Marine positions faced machine gun fire, rifle fire, artillery, mortars, and airstrikes. His weapon was typically an AK-47 assault rifle with 90 rounds of ammunition, or a SKS carbine, or perhaps a light machine gun if he was lucky. His protection was a cotton uniform, canvas webbing, and whatever hole he could find. His food was rice and dried fish carried in a cloth bag. His medical care, if wounded, was minimal, evacuation unlikely, antibiotics non-existent. He advanced because his officers ordered it, because the party demanded it, because he believed in the cause of reunification, because peer pressure and unit cohesion left him no choice, and because military units in combat function on discipline and mutual obligation more than individual decision-making. Personal accounts from both sides reveal the gulf between doctrine and experience. Lance Corporal Michael O'Hara, a machine gunner from Boston with M Company 3rd Battalion 26th Marines, described in a 1969 interview the surreal quality of fighting at Khe Sanh. At night, he said, you could hear them out there, hear Vietnamese voices, hear digging sounds, hear equipment being moved. The tension was unbearable because you knew they were coming, but you did not know when. Your trigger finger stayed ready. Every sound, every shadow, every movement in the wire might be the beginning of the assault. When listening posts reported movement and you opened fire, the tracers from your M60 machine gun reached out into the darkness, and sometimes you would hear screams, sometimes silence, and you never knew if you had hit anyone or if they were just going to ground. At dawn, you might see bodies hanging in the wire, or you might see nothing at all, the evidence dragged away during the night. You learn to function on 3 hours of sleep. You learn to eat without tasting. You learn to distinguish between incoming artillery by sound, to know if you had 5 seconds to take cover or just time to pray. You learned which of your friends were reliable under fire and which ones froze. You learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to function despite terror that made your hands shake and your bladder weak. From the NVA perspective, captured documents and post-war memoirs provide glimpses into their experience. A diary recovered from a dead NVA officer on Hill 881 North, translated by Marine Intelligence, described the frustration of attempting coordinated attacks against positions that responded with overwhelming fire. The entry detailed an assault planned for February 8th that was supposed to involve 3 companies attacking along different axes. Before the attack could fully develop, B-52 strikes hit the assembly areas, killing approximately 150 men. The survivors who continued the assault encountered pre-registered artillery fire that turned the approach routes into killing zones. Of the roughly 400 men who began the attack, fewer than 30 returned to their lines. The officer wrote that the Americans possessed supernatural powers of observation, that they could see in the dark, that their weapons never seemed to run out of ammunition, that continuing the siege under such conditions seemed futile, yet orders from higher command insisted the attacks continue, that Khe Sanh must fall, that the political necessity of victory overrode tactical considerations. Another captured document, a political commissar's report, addressed the morale problems arising from the casualty rates. It acknowledged that some soldiers questioned whether the objectives were achievable given American firepower, whether the losses were justified, whether the promises of victory were realistic. The commissar's solution was increased political indoctrination, execution of defeatists, and promises that reinforcements were coming with better weapons. The threatened assault against the main base perimeter, the final infantry attack that was supposed to overwhelm the Marine defenders, never fully materialized. There were probing attacks, there were firefights along the wire, there were tense nights when it seemed the human wave was about to break over the trenches, but the decisive assault that Giap had launched against the French never came at Khe Sanh. The reason becomes clear when examining the casualty figures and the effects of American firepower. The NVA divisions committed to Khe Sanh were being destroyed piecemeal before they could mass for the decisive attack. Every time they concentrated troops for assault, sensors detected the movement. Aircraft struck the assembly areas, artillery saturated the approach routes. The few attacks that reached Marine positions were beaten back with staggering losses. The NVA discovered what military theorists had predicted. Unsupported infantry assault against prepared defenses backed by modern firepower was suicidal. They could not dig approach trenches fast enough to reach the wire because the trenches were detected and struck. They could not mass artillery fires sufficient to suppress Marine defenses because their artillery was outranged and outgunned. They could not cut the supply line because American aircraft continued to fly despite losses. The siege devolved into a slow grind where the Americans traded shells and bombs for Vietnamese bodies at a rate that was militarily unsustainable for the NVA, regardless of their willingness to accept casualties. The strategic context shifted even as the siege continued. On January 30th, 1968, 9 days after Khe Sanh began, the NVA and Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive, a coordinated series of attacks across South Vietnam that struck more than 100 cities and towns simultaneously. American intelligence, fixated on Khe Sanh, had largely missed the preparations for Tet. The question that has occupied historians ever since is whether Khe Sanh was itself a strategic feint, a deception designed to draw American attention and resources to a remote location, while the real blow fell elsewhere. Some analysts believe Giap intended Khe Sanh as the decisive battle, but opportunistically launched Tet when intelligence indicated the attacks might succeed. Others argue Khe Sanh was always meant to be a diversion, that tying down American combat power and air assets at one location facilitated the broader offensive. The evidence remains ambiguous. What is clear is that after Tet, Hanoi's interest in Khe Sanh diminished. The siege continued through February and March, but the intensity decreased. Fewer artillery rounds fell, fewer ground attacks developed. Sensors detected NVA units withdrawing from the area. The divisions that had surrounded Khe Sanh melted back into Laos, back into the sanctuaries from which they had come. Operation Pegasus, the relief of Khe Sanh, began on April 1, 1968. The 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Marine Regiment, and ARVN airborne units launched a coordinated attack along Route 9 to break the siege. They encountered scattered resistance. The NVA had largely withdrawn. Engineers reopened the road, which had been cut for months by enemy action and neglect. On April 8th, lead elements of the relief force linked up with the Khe Sanh garrison. The Marines, who had held the base for 77 days, watched the cavalry arrive with mixed emotions. Relief, certainly. Vindication that they had held when so many predicted they would fall. But also anger at the implication that they needed rescue, when they had never truly been defeated, when they had killed enemy soldiers at ratios unprecedented in the war. The siege was over. The base had held. The promised Dien Bien Phu had not materialized. Instead, the NVA had lost somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 troops for no territorial gain, no strategic advantage, no propaganda victory. The mockery had been answered with firepower and blood. Post-war assessments of Khe Sanh remain contentious. From a purely military perspective, the Americans won decisively. They held the base. They inflicted massive casualties on enemy forces. They demonstrated that American firepower could defend isolated positions against numerically superior forces. The siege validated the concept of air-mobile operations and the ability of the Air Force and Navy to sustain ground forces through aerial resupply, even under the most difficult conditions. It proved that B-52 bombers could be employed in a tactical role with devastating effectiveness. It showed that sensor technology and fire coordination could multiply the effectiveness of conventional weapons. From this perspective, Khe Sanh was a model of how modern military forces should fight, accepting battle on favorable terms and using technology to offset numerical disadvantage. General Westmoreland considered it a significant victory and cited the casualty ratios as proof that attrition strategy was working. But other analysts reached different conclusions. The question that haunted strategic thinkers was, what did holding Khe Sanh actually accomplish? After the siege, the base was abandoned. In June 1968, just 2 months after the relief, American forces withdrew from Khe Sanh, dismantled the facilities, and relocated to positions further east. The combat base that had consumed so much effort, that had cost so many lives, that had dominated headlines for months, was simply abandoned. The North Vietnamese immediately moved back into the area. The strategic rationale for defending Khe Sanh, monitoring infiltration, and protecting the northern provinces evaporated with the decision to withdraw. This led some critics to argue that the entire siege had been a wasteful diversion. that the American command had been manipulated by Giap into fighting where and when the enemy chose, that the obsession with holding a remote base of questionable strategic value reflected the flawed assumptions underlying American strategy in Vietnam. If Khe Sanh was so important in January, why was it irrelevant by June? If killing thousands of NVA soldiers was the objective, that objective could have been accomplished without fixing American forces to a vulnerable position. The critique suggested that Westmoreland had been baited into a battle that served North Vietnamese purposes as much as American ones, even if the tactical outcome favored the Americans. The legacy of Khe Sanh in military history centers on several enduring lessons. First, firepower can substitute for manpower when properly coordinated and when the logistics exist to sustain expenditure rates. The Americans fired more artillery shells and dropped more bombs at Khe Sanh than many entire campaigns in previous wars. That volume of fire prevented what would have been inevitable in earlier eras, a numerically superior force overwhelming an outnumbered garrison. Second, air mobility and aerial resupply can sustain isolated forces in ways that were impossible before helicopters and transport aircraft. The garrison at Khe Sanh never faced the starvation and ammunition shortages that doomed the French at Dien Bien Phu, because the Air Force and Marine Corps kept supplies flowing despite losses and difficult conditions. Third, sensor technology and electronic warfare were beginning to transform battlefield awareness, giving defending forces the ability to detect attacks before they materialized and to direct fires with precision. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, tactical success does not automatically translate to strategic victory, a lesson that would be reinforced throughout the Vietnam War. For the men who fought there, Khe Sanh occupies a unique place in memory. Veterans of the siege formed associations, held reunions, and maintained contact across decades. They shared a bond forged under conditions that only they fully understood. When they described Khe Sanh to others, they struggled to convey the totality of the experience. The fear, the tedium, the sudden explosions, the friends lost, the sense of being abandoned at the end of the world while the rest of America watched on television. Some carried bitterness about the media coverage that compared them to the defeated French. Some struggled with what psychologists would later recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Some found meaning in the experience, believing that their stand at Khe Sanh had saved lives elsewhere, had validated the Marine Corps' reputation, had demonstrated American resolve. Many simply wanted recognition that they had done what was asked of them, that they had held when holding seemed impossible, that they had turned mockery into respect, written in the only language that matters in combat, survival and the destruction of those who came to destroy them. The Vietnamese perspective on Khe Sanh emerged slowly after the war ended. Official histories published in Hanoi acknowledged the battle but minimized its significance, treating it as a secondary operation rather than the decisive campaign it was intended to be. They emphasized the success of the Tet Offensive and the ultimate victory in 1975, folding Khe Sanh into the larger narrative of revolutionary struggle and eventual triumph. Individual veterans who survived the siege and wrote memoirs or gave interviews years later described it as the hardest fighting they experienced, worse than anything that came later, a battle where death arrived from invisible aircraft and artillery that seemed to fire without pause. Some expressed admiration for American firepower, even as they maintained their political commitment to the cause they had fought for. Others acknowledged that the casualties were almost unbearable, that entire units had been destroyed, that the promised victory had never materialized. The common thread was recognition that Khe Sanh had been different from other battles, that the concentration of firepower the Americans brought to bear exceeded anything they encountered elsewhere, that survival owed more to luck than skill. Decades later, when veterans from both sides occasionally met at conferences or historical commemorations, the conversations revealed common ground beneath the national and ideological divides. Both recognized courage in their opponents. Both acknowledged the arbitrary nature of survival in modern combat. Both expressed regret for the waste of war while maintaining that they had fought for principles they believed in. American Marines found that their Vietnamese counterparts were not the caricatures of propaganda, but professional soldiers who had endured hardships equal to their own. Vietnamese veterans recognized that the Americans they had fought were not the imperialist aggressors of political rhetoric, but young men sent to do a job, many of them drafted against their will, most of them just trying to survive and get home. These meetings, rare and always emotional, suggested that the deepest truth of Khe Sanh and of war generally lies not in the clash of ideologies or the grand sweep of strategic movements, but in the shared human experience of men pushed to the absolute limits of endurance. The question that opened this examination returns now with added weight. What does it take to turn certainty into terror, to transform mockery into nightmare? The answer Khe Sanh provides is simultaneously simple and profound. Superior firepower, modern logistics, and professional military forces can defeat numerically superior enemies when those elements are properly employed. But the deeper answer acknowledges that wars are won not by killing the enemy in sufficient numbers, but by breaking their will and achieving political objectives. At Khe Sanh, the Americans won every tactical engagement, inflicted casualties at ratios that would constitute decisive victory in any conventional measure, held their positions against siege and assault. Yet they abandoned the base months later, and 8 years after Khe Sanh ended, North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon to complete the reunification that had driven the entire war. The Marines who mocked those who mocked them, who turned the threatened Dien Bien Phu into a killing ground for their besiegers, who demonstrated that American forces could not be defeated on the battlefield, learned the hardest lesson of Vietnam: that military success is meaningless without strategic coherence, without political will, without an achievable objective that justifies the cost. Today, Khe Sanh Combat Base is a historical site. The Vietnamese government maintains some of the bunkers and displays a small museum. The airstrip is still visible, overgrown but intact. The hills that were once fortified positions are now returning to jungle. Locals farm the land that was cratered by bombs. The red clay that was stained with blood from both sides grows coffee and vegetables. Vietnamese tourists visit occasionally, and American veterans make pilgrimages, seeking closure or simply wanting to see again the place that defined their lives. They stand at the edge of what was once the runway, looking at the hills where the enemy waited, and they remember. They remember the sound of incoming artillery, the smell of cordite and mud, the weight of fear that was their constant companion for 77 days. Some place flowers at memorials. Some take photographs. Most stand silently, grappling with memories that have not faded in 50 years, with the ghosts of friends who never left Khe Sanh, with the question of what it all meant. If you, like me, feel that the history of Vietnam still has much to teach us, this channel is your refuge. Here we don't just deal with dates and battles, but with the human stories behind the events that shaped our world. I know how difficult it is to find content that goes beyond the superficial, that truly explains the technical and strategic nuances without losing the human element. That's why every week I bring you stories meticulously researched and narrated as if you were there. If you want to deeply understand the events that defined the 20th century and continue this journey of historical discoveries with me, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can keep alive the memory of those who sacrificed everything in the conflicts that shaped our modern world.